Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session of Life, the Universe, and Everything 39. This panel is Edgar Rice Burroughs, Early American Pulp Fiction. We're having a little video problem. I will fix that as we go. Our panelists today will be Garrett, Mary Murdock, Richie Franklin, and you will be moderated by Beth Buck. Go ahead, panel.
All right. Well, I want everybody to know that I was really excited, or I am really excited to be part of this panel, even as a moderator. It kind of brought me back to the days of my misspent youth when I first discovered the works of Edgar Rice Burroughs. So hopefully we can impart some of that to our attendees here. Before we introduce our panelists, just wanted to kind of introduce Edgar Rice Burroughs as a person. He was born in 1875, and he's best known for his character Tarzan of the Apes, which he wrote 20-something books on that character, and it's been adapted into many, many, many film adaptations. And he also is known for his Barsoom series, also known as Princess of Mars is the first book in that series, and it was adapted in 2012 as John Carter. So first, let's have the panelists introduce themselves. Can you take 2 minutes and tell us not only about yourselves, but about how you came to have a relationship with this author and how you feel about his work? Jared, can we start with you?
Sure. I am Jared Garrett. Hopefully y'all can hear me okay. Chew on the microphone. Books were a huge part of my childhood. I think for a lot of us, they're a big part of our childhood. They provided a much needed escape from a truly ridiculously, uniquely bad life that I was having. I discovered Tarzan when I was about 11. And between the age of 11 and about 15 or 16, I tracked down, I think, all of the Tarzan books in the multitude of libraries I had access to. These stories were ridiculous. They were totally unrealistic, poorly researched probably, and absolutely wonderful. They just blew my mind how with adventure and with heroes that were completely over the top and superhuman and would do anything for love. And that pretty much sums up my life since then. Even though I'm not superhuman or over the top, I would do anything for love.
Great.
So that's
Very, how about you?
You're hearing Meatloaf.
Sorry, did you want me to go next?
Yes, please.
Okay. My name is Maddie Murdock. I am a professor at Westminster College, but my graduate degree was actually in early 20th century literature. Pulp literature is actually my guilty pleasure and my expertise in that field. I particularly love Edgar Rice Burroughs because when I was very young, my father brought home his Barsoom series novels that had the really awful 1970s covers. I mean, I think they're delightful, but I think looking back on them now, we can all agree that they are something else. The bright colors, the half-naked people, the interesting aliens, right? And just from the time I was little, I really wanted to learn how to read so that I could read those books because they were so bizarre to me. And I actually didn't read them until I was in high school, oddly enough, because they got put in a box somewhere because my mom was like, get those out of the house. And my dad was like, I'm not getting rid of these. So I didn't read them until I was in high school, but I immediately just fell in love with Edgar Rice Burroughs' style. He has the high adventure, high fantasy, and it's also kind of like the science fiction fantasy in there that I really enjoyed. Because I got into that series, I delved into the Tarzan series after that, and I just kind of went on this rabbit hole into Edgar Rice Burroughs and all the weird, bizarre things that he's written. And definitely since then, he's still kind of held a little place in my heart as one of my favorite pulp fiction writers of all time.
I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights. Richard, can you tell us about your experience with Mr. Burroughs?
Yeah, hi, my name is Richard Franklin, and I write historical fiction, religious historical fiction. I also wrote turn of the 20th century um, detective series that was set in the Old West and turn of the century New York City, somewhat like the Murdock mysteries. But as part of that, I love Edgar Rice Burroughs, and my first introduction to him was A Princess of Mars, which I found on audiobook. And then later I saw the covers and I thought, oh man, this is what I've been reading. I love it so much. And I really do. So I read that whole series. Later on in my career, I was picked up to write a Sword and Planet role-playing game for Gallant Knight Games. That the description that was given to me was it should be Edgar Rice, or cross of Barsoom and Treasure Planet, and I just totally geeked out. That was exactly what I wanted to write. And so I've written all of the flavor text into a world that's similar and borrowed heavily from Edgar Rice Burroughs in terms of trying to create my approach for that and whatnot. So I love his books. I love Tarzan. I used the fire scene at the end of the first Tarzan book as inspiration for one of the scenes that I wrote in one of my books, and just I love the whole pulp, the way that it was described earlier, like just crazy, ridiculous, do anything for love, heroic fiction is just a guilty pleasure, and I just love it.
No guilt allowed.
So before we delve into some of the questions that we have, Richard, could you describe for our viewers the fire scene that you're talking about and why it captured your imagination so much?
Yeah, so I need to be careful with this because it's a little bit of a damsel in distress scenario. But at the end of Tarzan, the first book, Tarzan comes to the city to find Jane, and Jane is at this plantation, and Clayton, right, who's kind of the villain character, he does something that makes her run off into the woods, and she runs off into the woods, and Tarzan rolls up dressed to the nines, looking like, like $1,000,000, and he's decided to become a civil gentleman. And then this fire breaks out in this forest where Jane has run out into the woods. She's terrified. She's convinced she's going to die. The forest is in flames, and then this jungle man dressed in a suit comes swinging in and scoops her up into his arms and swings out and solidifies, that he is the perfect marriage of the noble savage and the modern gentleman. And I loved kind of that scene of utter desperation, and then the hero sweeping in. Yeah, though dated, it was a lot of fun.
Thank you for sharing that with everyone. Okay, so the first question that I want to pose to all of you: what stylistic elements is Edgar Rice Burroughs known for, and what aspects of his work have you found the most creative, not only for his time, but objectively creative and or inspiring? Who would like to go first?
I can say, just kind of summarizing what we've already kind of covered, right? We're talking about stories that are larger than life. We have kind of the absolutes of like good and evil and like right and wrong, and we have like power, and we have elements of, I would say, superhuman characteristics that can belong to an actual mortal person, right? And then that person can defy all odds, whether they be supernatural or like from the natural world, being like animals or weather or the jungle or something like that. And then we also have very, I would say, distinct kind of like character archetypes for men and women, right?
Yeah.
That are very, I would say, by our standards, they're, I would say, a little more old-fashioned. Richard definitely kind of used some of that language to describe the relationship between the damsel in distress and the hero, who's also a gentleman, right? And I also think that we have very clear villains, right? We don't have the moral dilemma of, oh, this villain is torn, or this villain has, some type of backstory that makes him sympathetic. Like, we have real villains that are just bad, and the good guy needs to destroy that person. And so I think those are very thematic, at least as far as a lot of pulp, but specifically the types of fiction that are the types of novels Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote, for sure.
I go.
Oh, okay, thanks. So I think I'm thinking about him, Mr. Burroughs here, and how he got into writing. And I think the story goes that I think he was selling pencil sharpeners. He read some rag, as he called it, and it was just terrible pulp, really bad stuff. And he's like, I'm sure I could write something better than this. And so he tried. And I think there's a quote from some other authors, like, he tried to write the worst book possible, and this is what he succeeded in doing. For me, the influence on my life and on a lot of other authors is that he tried to just focus entirely on entertaining. He wanted to sweep readers away into this daring do, these swashbuckling adventures, just have them not even think about their own life and their own troubles. And there's a lot of writers who do that, a lot of science fiction writers, even very serious science fiction writers, who do want to make sure that they're still sweeping their reader away. And in the way that the main character especially, is faced by trial after trial after trial, and overcomes every single one of them, of course, without a whole lot of effort. But it's still pretty rad and pretty awesome and very imaginative. I think that's, for me, I think that's one of the biggest influences. He's just wildly entertaining. And speaking of those funky aliens, I think John Carter got short shrift. I will probably get there. But I think one of his creative, kind of the magnificence of his creation is that he would think of, I think he must have asked himself, what would be the most cool thing I could do right now? What is the craziest thing I could create? Creature. I actually I have this from John Carter. It's a freaking awesome little figurine, and the little dog guy from John Carter as well. That what's the coolest thing I could do possibly right now? And we'll do that. Or what's the worst that could happen? And I'll do that right now. So he's a master of stakes, high imagination, and just high entertainment, although it's very not literary entertainment.
Yeah. I think for me, this is a great question, is, going back to what Maddie said earlier about these people that are put into amazing scenarios. You look at like John Carter, and he was a normal person, right? The thing that made him so heroic was that he was noble, and that he wanted to do the right thing, and that he was a gentleman, a Virginia gentleman or whatever. But you put him on Mars, and all of a sudden his Earth strength that, in this lower gravity, makes him a superhero. And Tarzan is the exact same thing, right? He's a normal, child that's raised, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about this later, but he was a English gentleman that was raised with this kind of background that made him into a marriage of the noble hero and with superhuman abilities that were granted to him either through chance or through his background or their background.
So one of the things that I've noticed about his work is, being as it is almost 100 years ago, he was writing science fiction before really we knew much about science. And so I would argue that a lot of science fiction today, whether it's hard SF or space opera, we still kind of have the expectation where it has to be just realistic enough to enable us to suspend our disbelief. Kind of like gravity doesn't work that way, so you can't do that. But because Edgar Rice Burroughs did not have that handicap, because nobody really knew as much about as much about Mars as we do today. And so what do you think he influenced science fiction as we know it today?
I think I'll jump in real quick with that. I think that we still see some tenets of that pulp science fiction that he started. You want, Star Trek, and I'm a huge Next Generation fan. You still have some of that, that feeling of. I had a coworker who described it as we're going to beam down to this planet. Oh, there's hot women here. Okay, well, we'll do something heroic and save the day, right? And honestly, that was a female coworker, and I was like, well, there's some of that that's still, you know, it informed a lot of that early science fiction through the pulp era, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even into, you know, what we watch today. Certainly, we have a different approach to science fiction. We have a lot more knowledge about, you know, about planets and things like that. But I think part of what he did so well, and this is what people say about Star Wars, or excuse me, Firefly, is it's a Western in space. And that's kind of what you're getting with this John Carter story. And with Tarzan too, is you've got this marriage of a romantic genre that people love, or have loved in the past. But I'm going to start to infuse some of this new knowledge that we have, and still I still kind of weave some of that through it. But I'm able to layer in what we know. Right back then, everybody was fascinated what's on Mars, and for us today, it's what's through the wormhole, or you know, what would it be like? But you can still take those genres and the kind of the underpinnings of pulp fiction, and like Jared said, create a great entertaining story that still has that hard science fiction or fantasy aspects to it.
I think there's also an aspect of I think maybe he was asking what's the coolest thing I could do, or what's the worst that could happen, but he may have been also saying what's the strangest thing I could do. And I think that strangeness, or that alienness that he sets his stories in, you know, Tarzan, not a lot of people had made, you know, taken a lot of time to traipse through jungles or live in jungles, and Barsoom and Pellucidar down in the center of the earth. He injected these heroes who got kind of powers or abilities, or who were the right person in the right place, which was the strange place. He put them in there, put them against an absolute villain, not some morally divided villain or something like that. That is awesome. And it also does influence science fiction today, because we're still wondering what's out there. We're still wondering, you know, how strange could it be? I just read an article in the New Yorker about how alien life might be on some of those planets, those exoplanets out there. It's this question of curiosity and strangeness, I think, is never going to go away, and Burroughs absolutely captured it.
And I think one thing that also I think his brilliance comes from is this ability to find humanity in situations where there are no humans. So whether that's humanity in an alien race or humanity in an animal species, right? What we're doing is we're kind of pitting man against the unknown and seeing what happens, kind of shake the box a little bit and see what comes out. And so I think just like we were kind of saying here, right? Like people are wondering what would it be like to go to a different planet and meet an alien culture. And I think, you know, considering how many novels he wrote about space, not just on Mars, but also about Venus and whatnot, right? He's really interested in like, what does it mean to be human, and what does that look like compared to something that's not? And I like that he did a really good job with kind of using this, I would say maybe like science fiction, to kind of explore that question a lot. And I think that that's something that does continue on definitely in our current pop culture, for sure.
I really liked what you said about finding humanity in the alien. It's like in Princess of Mars, you have like the four-armed people and their babies hatched from eggs and stuff. But then you also have this side story about Tarkus, the chief, whose daughter secretly is Soja, the outcast. And I almost kind of wish that he had emphasized that more, because that's what really touched me when I was reading it. That you have this very, very human, very poignant story about these alien people. So to move on, unless
yeah, I've got something real quick.
Okay. So to move on. Oh, sorry. Did you have something?
Yeah, sorry, Beth.
Sorry.
I think that, you know, finding the humanity is a big part of, you know, our characters go to a strange place and have to be heroic. In the finding of that humanity, I think what we're finding is, or what he explored was, what is human, or what are the things that are important to humans. And as you were just mentioning, Tarkus, he had honor, which John Carter could recognize. He recognized what honor looked like in this alien world, and as well as family and the politics and the dynamics of family, but not necessarily legitimate family, and what duty looks like. Those are universal, as far as we know right now, universal attributes or principles that we look for and that delight us, especially in our stories. So I think that's another thing that we're going to keep seeing in good science fiction fantasy too.
Yes, and you mentioned honor, and that's one of Tarzan's driving forces as well. So for those who haven't read all 20 of the Tarzan books, one character arc of Tarzan's is Jane is actually at one point engaged to this other guy, Clayton, and because there's that relationship, then Tarzan says, "Whoa, okay, so I'm gonna back off." And of course, as readers, we're like, "No, but you need to kiss because you already kissed that one time." So, but then we see, I can't get what I want because my honor is more important.
Yeah, honor as an obstacle, right?
Yeah.
That's speaking to the nobility of the characters, right? This idea that honor would prevent me, and it becomes the obstacle that it has to be overcome.
But the interesting thing about that situation is that for some reason, right, and this is kind of like my beef with Tarzan as a character, right? He has adopted British noble senses of honor, right? And that conflicts with how he was raised in the animal kingdom. But for some reason, he just like inherently keeps those and lives by those, and they become, a part of his personality, even though he was raised divorced from all of that, which is so interesting to me. Which, definitely not believable, but it's an interesting, I think, little challenge for him, because he realizes this is what I should do, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to uphold that no matter what, right?
Right. So we've talked a little bit about how there's a lot of similarities between his Tarzan characters and his Barthoom series. So as for the writers who are watching this, what commercial, like as they are writing, what can they take away commercially for how they can have the same kind of success with their own writing? Or more simply put, Edgar Riceborough was highly successful because of what he did with his characters, what he managed to do with them. So how can other writers copy what he did to find their own success?
That I think that he did marvelously was that he was not afraid of the power of his own imagination, right? Like, he found inspiration in all kinds of things, and because he was writing it, I would say this is kind of a marker of the pulp fiction genre, but he was able to just kind of decide, like, my imagination is something that I can turn into a commodity and I can share with other people, and I don't care what other people think about my imagination. I'm just going to tell the stories that I want to tell, and that I think are interesting. And I think there is some maybe, I guess, wise words that you could probably give to a budding writer about that. But I think that that's something that is definitely part of the genius of Edgar Rice Burroughs, was that he was just like, space is not even the limit, right? Like, I'm just going to go all the way with any idea that I have, because I'm so in love with the world that I've created, the characters that I can kind of use to play in this world, and I'm not going to let anything stop me. And he was just able to just kind of capitalize on that free-flowing, unhindered ability to just tell stories as he saw fit.
I would really agree with that. To add just a little bit, he I think sometimes as a writer, back in the day when I was more of a novice writer, I would sort of think, okay, here's my end scene, and it's going to be pretty cool, but I can't have anything cooler before my end scene, so I'm going to hold back a little bit. But in reviewing some Burroughs and watching John Carter and some other good inspiring fiction, I realized that's dumb. Why hamstring myself? If as I'm writing, I come up with this freaking awesome showdown scene, where my hero comes sliding out of an alcove with guns blazing, doing a backflip or something. That's awesome. I'm going to write that. And yeah, that means I have to write something cooler for the actual end showdown. And what could be better than being challenged to write something even cooler than that? I feel like Burroughs was absolutely, like you were saying, Marty, he was unhindered. He did not hold back. I think he was a little unafraid of screwing up. He just thought, let me write this and we'll see where it takes me.
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of I'm going to write what I want to write. And as you said earlier, Jared, right, with the poor research, so what? I'm going to write a cool scene, type thing. I think another thing that's interesting is his ability to connect us to a character that then he carried. I mean, he just milked that character for everything. We talked about how many Tarzan books were written and how many movies were made based on that Tarzan character. And if you really hook in with a good character, I mean, there's a reason when Disney made the movie of A Princess of Mars, they called it John Carter. Because I think people want to connect to the characters, and you can take a character, right, a Harry Potter, and you can take that character through several different stories, several different experiences, as long as you can kind of keep true to what drives that character. It doesn't even matter, I think, the genre or the ridiculous kind of situation you put them in sometimes, right? But when we talk about Pulp, it can get really ridiculous, but you can put them through some experiences that, as long as you can keep that connection to the characters, or you can keep driving, the passion, like you talked about, Beth, with the sexual tension between two characters, you can continue that through all sorts of the stories you want to tell, using that character, that James Bond, that whatever it is that you want to use as your vehicle, Dirk Pitt or whatever.
I think that also brings up a really interesting point about characterization. So pulp fiction is really known for iconic characters. And that means that these are characters that actually don't necessarily need any type of like story arc or character growth. Like what we're interested in seeing them do is just be them, right? Like they might have like a minor quandary about like, oh no, I have this problem, but they're essentially not really going to change from book 1 to book 20, right? Like Tarzan is Tarzan, and in any situation that we put him in, and we're interested in reading the next book because we just love Tarzan so much. And so I think something that's really, I would say, unique, and I think that it can be done, like you mentioned, Rich, like there are other instances of that, like maybe perhaps people like James Bond, right, where we just like fall in love with a character and they could be doing anything and we'll watch them do it. I think that that's something that you could potentially, as a beginning writer, kind of try to do. Think of some kind of character that could be iconic enough that we don't care what they're doing, we just love them doing it.
Just make them really cool. Really cool.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that, though. I think that's a good call, and I'll walk back a little bit on my Harry Potter comments, and because there is more of a story arc that's over, and in that pulp, when you're looking at that, you're exactly right that is a we want to see that person being them, and that's part of what the fun is. When you want to check out and you want to just read a fun story, you want that character to basically act the way that they always act. That's a great comment.
Right. And we see that in the Tarzan series, over the course of the first maybe 4 books, you have this story arc where he marries Jane finally, and they have a baby, but then Jane gets kidnapped, and so he has to go rescue her, and then they go back to England and raise their son. But then a couple of books later, somebody is just randomly in the jungle, and Tarzan steps out of the jungle. It's like, I'm Tarzan. And so you kind of wonder, wait, weren't you okay? But he was Tarzan. He has to be Tarzan. So let's see. This is a little bit an elephant in the room, but we mentioned how Tarzan of the Apes was first published in 1912, and consequently, a lot of the writing reflects some of the attitudes about race and sex that today we find inappropriate. But we would not want people to completely eschew reading his work because of those reasons. So, what are some tools that you recommend for potential readers of Edgar Riceborough's work so that they can enjoy the good things in there without feeling like they are not allowed to read it because it's inappropriate? So that was kind of long-winded. So, more simply put, how can we not throw the baby out with the bathwater?
I guess I could basically something that I tell my students whenever I'm teaching literature. Specifically, if you notice something that is wrong, like acknowledge it. I think that that's a really important tool, like to realize whatever book you're reading, like we as a society hopefully have moved on from whatever it was and just really acknowledge the fact that, like that particular character or that particular scene is backwards, right? Like that is not something that is socially acceptable today. And just kind of starting with that point and deciding where to go from there is, I think, part of just being a mature reader, is understanding that, like, yes, the author was a product of their time, but I think, learn from that, make sure that you are aware of that problem and move past it. I think that's at least a good place to start.
I think, yeah, that's a great comment. I have a friend who writes cosmic horror, and he frequently refers to his literature as Lovecraftian horror. And he was the one who first kind of shared with me some of Lovecraft's writings or opinions on race or things at the time. And I kind of, I can't believe you support this. And he said, well, he was a product of his time. And when I look at that, it's interesting to view history through the lens of those who wrote entertainment, or those who created entertainment. But I remember when I first read the Barsoom series, and there was a race of black aliens, and frequently bad. I don't remember connecting that and thinking that this was connected to a race on Earth. It was just, we're going to have a blue alien, a red alien, a green alien, and a black alien, and so that, as a younger reader, I didn't find that influencing too much, of my own reading of the story. In our day and age, I think that that's a much harder kind of separation to make. But I loved the comments that Mari made about recognizing what that time comes from, and that it's not necessarily a treatise on race necessarily, but it's a story that was written in its time period, just as people will go back and read what we write now and see how it was influenced by COVID, how it was influenced by George Floyd, how it was influenced by the Black Lives Matter movement, all very, very important things that have influenced who we are, and what we write. And so it just creates an interesting lens into understanding the past, as well as creating an entertaining story that's fun to read.
I have just one other thought, I think. So Burroughs, and a lot of writers, not just Burroughs, a lot of writers through history, they did their writing for a couple of reasons. One was to make some money, and Burroughs did okay, it turns out, and then also to entertain. And sometimes it's good for the reader to think, why am I picking up a book? Do I want to be elevated? Do I want to be educated? Do I want to be entertained? Do I want to do all of these things? And the reader can take and read what they want to read and enjoy what they want to enjoy. And maybe as they read, they notice, what, I think that little thing here points to an attitude that I don't think is right, about race or about gender. And that will be, I don't know, that'll maybe make them stronger in their belief and in what they know is right and wrong. Fiction will do that for you. You know, you see good examples and bad examples from both heroes and villains and stuff. So people are going to read the same book as I read, and they're going to read it differently. I mean, for one example is Tolkien. Tolkien was not a racist. Orcs are not, supposed to have some sort of analog in our world of when it comes to race. The man wrote incredible essays about how Nazis were terrible and their racism was terrible. But still, some people read that and say that's racism. I think they're wrong. But in Burroughs' case, of course, he was a eugenicist and he was a racist. And so we do need to be careful of, trying to defend somebody who might not be all that defendable. But the point for me is that these books are still entertaining to me. I still get a great kick out of them. And as an adult, when I reread them, I say, oh, you know what? That's a thing that I can see some of what I know about Burroughs here. And that's not something I want to take into myself.
And something that I'm noticing today is the kind of the reclaiming of pulp fiction from racist roots. And from sexist roots, especially with the recent boom of popularity with people like Lovecraft, right? We're suddenly kind of putting these pulp fiction writers under the microscope and deciding like, well, what value do these stories have? And I think, Jared, you're absolutely right. Like their entertainment and their imagination is something that we just can't discard, right? And so in modern movements, what we're doing is we're deciding, okay, we're going to take what's good and run with it, and we're going to take out what was bad and leave that behind in the past, and we're going to reclaim it and make kind of like new narratives with what we learned from literary giants in the past. And so I think that if you are a writer who is finding, inspiration from maybe someone who was a racist or was a sexist or had horrible philosophies, I think what you can do is you can reclaim that story and reclaim the kind of imagination for yourself and reshape that into something new. And that's something that I think like the recent show Lovecraft Country on HBO did really well, right? Because it had a primarily Black cast, which is a really interesting kind of reclaiming of Lovecraft. And they even had Edgar Riceborough kind of mixed in there, and saying like, we're actually going to tell our own story using this kind of same high, like pulp fiction, high adventure type of format, but we're just going to get rid of all the bad stuff that we don't like anymore.
And then we can just keep in mind that, maybe in 20 or 30 years or even another generation or two, somebody might look at our stuff and say, Jared Garrett, oh my gosh. He had no idea what he was writing about. Still a fun book, though. I'm going to give his great-grandkids some money and buy my book.
I hope so. I hope we can continue to progress as a culture and be
Agree.
aware.
Wow, that was very insightful. Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question before we move to audience Q&A. So this is more lighthearted and less academic. What is your favorite film adaptation of Edgar Riceborough's work?
Oh my gosh.
Because there's so many, right?
I'm just going to put out there, I have not seen the Disney John Carter. That may be blatant heresy on this panel, I know.
Oh my gosh.
However, I have seen some of the old Tarzans, and I do really love them. As a lover of classic movies, TCM, old black and white films, they are just a romp, and they're fun.
Well, I actually can't choose between two. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jared. Go ahead.
John Carter is wildly underrated. It was poorly marketed. The name John Carter is fine. I knew what the meaning of John Carter was, but not enough people knew. It's a wildly accessible movie. It's well acted, well produced. I love that movie deeply. Deeply.
I will repent, Jared. I'll go see it.
Get that done. But also the latest Tarzan, I think with Steven Skarsgård or something. It's fantastic. It's like gloriously good. I watched it on an airplane flying back from like Munich or something once, and it blew my mind. I wanted to watch it again, and I did. It's phenomenal. I highly recommend it if you haven't seen that one. I don't know why I didn't even know it existed, but I only found out it existed on the little menu on the plane. Glorious movie.
I'll definitely echo Jared there, where I think the most recent Tarzan movie was so good. It was everything that the books promise, you know. And so if you love the kind of same spirit of Tarzan in the books, I think the kind of the blockbuster version of it is fantastic. I also obviously love the Disney version because I think that it's an interesting reimagination of the character for children. Because I don't know that Tarzan himself is actually something that children should pick up. I think maybe young teens. But and yes, the soundtrack is amazing, right? Super catchy, will get stuck in your head. Phil Collins, right? I also really loved John Carter Disney film. I thought it was brilliant. I think that was an excellent reimagination of the characters, like we were just talking about, like kind of the sexism that was in the Barsoom series was totally erased by Lynn Collins' beautiful portrayal of Deja Thoris as a scientist and like a politically active princess. I thought that was genius. I didn't particularly like John Carter himself. I thought he wasn't the same type of like hero that he is in the novels, but I think everyone else was brilliant in that movie. I think Willem Dafoe as Tars Tarkas is my favorite thing that I've ever seen. And so I would definitely recommend those three things.
Wonderful. Well, let's see. So, all right, I think we're ready to take some questions from our audience.
Okay, we have a recurring question, which you've partially covered, but let's ask the question anyway. Can you comment on the John Carter movie and whether it meets the spirit of Edgar Rice Burroughs?
Absolutely, in some ways, not at all in other ways, but I think that's the same with any adaptation.
I would definitely echo what Muddy said. The character of John Carter in that is less larger than life, a little more kind of small, you could say. So that doesn't quite echo, but man, the adventure, the rip roaring swashbuckling crazy stuff is there. I mean, and if you want portal fantasy / science fiction, that's kind of right where it's at. It's glorious. I think it's wonderful. And Tars Tarkas, the whole culture is of those aliens. It's glorious. I loved it.
I have no comment.
Go watch it tonight.
I need to go watch it tonight. I've got a TV right here with connection to Disney Plus. I should watch it.
Okay, and our last question and thought is, it seems that the earliest books in both of Mr. Burroughs' popular series were written in the 1910s, the Edwardian era. Can you comment on the fact that in both series it seems that one aspect of freedom was men running around in scanty clothing?
I mean, yes, please. I'm just kidding.
You don't want to see that.
I think that's actually a very insightful question. Where you have this culture where you have like the starched collars and the hats and so it's almost like you're casting off their cultural inhibitions.
Lifestyle of someone who has those. So I think I like the question in that, yes, I think that maybe casting off kind of like the outward appearance of heroism is interesting in in comparison to what is actually timeless about that lifestyle, which is the values and the virtue of the genteel, shall I say.
Yeah, I think that those are great comments about it. And what a cool question. It was a time period where they were approaching the 1920s, right, which was the Roaring 20s. A lot of kind of freedom was coming and on its way, and so this idea of men, taking off their clothes and running around, part of it I think is a celebration of masculinity, if I may say that. But the very insightful comment about the internalization of the values that were kind of espoused at the time, but also this dream, and I think we have it to this day. This idea of, I go to my white collar job and then I go to the gym so I can look like a blue collar worker, right? This kind of idea that I live in the city and I have this life that's kind of whatever, but I have these visions of going out into the wild and being that there's still a piece of that that's still inside of me, and I think that there was a little bit of vicarious living through these characters for the readers of the time. I don't know that for sure, but I think so. And also for Burroughs himself, who had been a fighter, and and didn't get into West Point and things like that, and he had wanted to go and live this kind of a wild life, and I'm still in control of the environment around me.
Yeah, he was a war correspondent at, I think, like age 80 almost. He still had something in the basement, as Rocky Balboa says. I would just say, number one, I don't like shoes. I do my best to not wear them. Makes me feel free. That's about all I'll get into there. But this idea of tearing off kind of the Edwardian outwards appearance and kind of exposing all the muscles and stuff, whatever, to become a hero. I think it's sort of symbolic in a way of, throwing off the trappings of constraint and of fear and cowardice and the sometimes trivial duties that we're asked to do by society, and finding out who you really are. Do you want to be a hero? If you do, tear off your shirt, put on a loincloth, and go save somebody. Sounds good to me.
Okay. So a final question. Do you think there are any authors writing today who are pulpy as Edgar Riceborough was?
Can I just say a couple? So there's a guy named James Alderdice, who's also, his real name is David West. He writes pulp like crazy. It's a little more rip-roaring action than even Burroughs, but they're very, very action-packed stuff. And there's a lady named Blake Northcott who's writing amazingly cool graphic novels for Catwoman, or comics for Catwoman, as well as some novels. I recommend her, Blake Northcott, and James Alderdice / David J. West. I write pulp too, but it's nothing quite as insanely over the top as Burroughs.
I think I may get in big trouble for saying this, but I think Dresden is kind of a pulpy story.
Oh, yeah.
As those, get put out. I know that's, if I'm looking for a modern fix that's similar to when I would pick up like a Barsoom book or a Tarzan book, I'll reach for a Dresden Files, and I'm not, wherever it is in the order, there is more of an arc. It's not quite as pulpy, but it is, to me, sometimes I'm like, yeah, it's Harry Dresden being Harry Dresden, and it's awesome.
Yeah, Cussler's like that too.
Yeah. I would argue that pulp fiction also kind of transmuted into what we would consider today more storytelling that really fits in like the comic book genre, or even like kids TV shows. And so I think that pulp fiction has kind of morphed into those two types of genres very well. And so I would suggest, if you're looking for something that is pulpy, then definitely look at superhero comics of any kind. And then even for TV shows, I would suggest like stories like the most recent She-Ra reimagination series, right, where you have stories of characters that are just delightful, going on amazing adventures in space, and I